The Verdict, a Sidebar production, hosted by Kent Myers and Mick Cornett. As a part of its traditional and continuing commitment to public and community service, Crow and Dunlevy sponsors The Verdict. Also sponsored by Delta Dental, Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, and C.H. Guernsey and Company. Each week on The Verdict, we present an objective discussion of contemporary and legal issues, topical issues that will affect Oklahomans in their daily lives. The Verdict, a Sidebar production.
And welcome to The Verdict. I'm Mick Cornett. Thanks for joining us. And if you are a regular viewer, you know that I'm joined, as always, by one of Oklahoma's top legal experts, Kent Myers. Kent, what is on tap, pun intended, for today?
Oh, I wish you would clean that up a little bit. Oh, we're talking about water again on tap. That's like luring Bass Pro in the Oklahoma City.
Exactly. Reached way down for that one.
You really did, but we'll keep marching just as though you didn't do it. We're going to go back to the subject that we talked about last week, and that's the sale of water from Oklahoma to Texas by the entities that have ownership of it. Last week we talked about should we do it, why do it. This week we're going to talk with the same two guests we had on last week about how it has been proposed to be done. Now, it's not a pending transaction. It's not going to happen tomorrow. The legislature's going to have to act again before it can happen, and I'm sure there will be lots of discussion about how it should occur. But we're going to be talking about how the revenue from the sale of the water should be divided between the Indian tribes that are involved and the state of Oklahoma. And once the money is given to the state of Oklahoma, how should it be used? Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, I'll alert the viewers to this, that we'll be talking about some provisions of the compact that would say that since the water comes from southeastern Oklahoma, that the money that is generated for the state from the sale of that water ought to be spent in southeastern Oklahoma. People of southeastern Oklahoma may think that's quite a good idea. People in the rest of the state may think that if that's a state resource, it ought to be spent for the good of the entire state. A little controversial issue there. And we'll be talking about some other things. I think it'll be a really good show.
Well, let's get started. We'll take a break and come back and meet our guest, Mick Cornett, Kent Myers, The Verdict.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
The Verdict is pleased to have as a sponsor C.H. Guernsey and Company, providing architectural and engineering services to clients throughout the U.S. and around the world.
And Blankenship has stopped at the line of scrimmage. No gain on the play, leaving it 4th and 7 on the Tiger 46-yard line. 38 seconds on the clock. The Tigers have no choice but to go for it. Wiggins in to do the kicking. Here's the snap, and the kick is away.
We're pleased today to have as our guest Lisa Mcallister. Lisa is a secretary in the Oklahoma City office and has been with the firm of Crow and Dunlevy for 9 years. Lisa, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Ken.
We have asked you here today because of your activities with the Race for the Cure. Tell our viewers just briefly what is the Race for the Cure and why is there a Race for the Cure?
Well, the Race for the Cure was founded in 1982. It's called the Susan G. Komen Race for the Cure. Susan G. Komen is a woman that lost her life to breast cancer at the age of 36. Her sister Nancy Branker started the foundation.
And it raises money for cancer research, I take it?
That's correct, for breast cancer research, screening, education.
Well, now, you've been with the firm for a number of years. How did you get involved with Race for the Cure?
Ken, I'm a breast cancer survivor of a little over 4 years, and that's how I became involved with the Race for the Cure. I thought it was important to give back because I've been so fortunate.
Well, what did you do to support Race for the Cure, particularly within the firm?
What I do within the firm is I coordinate putting together the Crow and Dunlevy race team and signing up our participants and collecting money from sponsors around the firm to help.
What size race team did the Oklahoma City office of Crow and Dunlevy enter this year?
Well, we had over 50 Crow and Dunlevy participants
Runners?
on our team, runners on our team.
And raised substantial sums of money, I suppose.
That's correct.
How does that 50 or 50 plus numbers compare with what the firm has done in the past?
We do, this year was our biggest team, and every year our team just seems to grow and grow.
And you're kind of in charge of getting that done?
That's correct.
Well, just in the few seconds we have remaining, why is it, Lisa, that Race for the Cure is important? What would you like our viewers to know about that?
Well, when a woman is diagnosed with breast cancer, it's important that she not walk alone. It takes a team effort to raise the funds, to put towards research, screening, testing, and just community awareness of breast cancer.
Lisa, thank you so much for talking about Race for the Cure. We're really pleased to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, who's going to introduce our guests.
We're pleased to welcome back to the verdict the guests that we had from last week. On my right is Howard Barnett, the Chief of Staff for Governor Keating. Second visit to the verdict. Comes to state government in his Chief of Staff position with much private law practice and business experience. Pretty much in the Tulsa area, I guess. He has degrees from the University of Tulsa and Southern Methodist University and is past chairman of the Metropolitan Tulsa Chamber of Commerce. Welcome back.
Glad to be back, Kent.
Glad
Thank
to
you.
have you. Across the table is the Honorable Deborah Blackburn, the Democratic representative from District 88 in Oklahoma City. Deborah is also making her second visit to the verdict. She's active in a number of organizations outside the legislature, including the Oklahoma Academy for State Goals, as well as a number of other things, including children's organizations. She is in the legislature. She is, among other things, a member of the Appropriations and Budget Committee, has lived in Oklahoma City approximately 20 years, and we're certainly pleased to have you back.
Good to be here, thank you.
What we're talking about, folks, of course, as you well know, is the sale of water to Texas, like we were discussing last week. And I'd like, Howard, perhaps to start with you and ask you to outline the process that must be completed in a general way, what steps must be taken in order for the proposed sale to become an actual sale. By that I mean, who has to approve it for it to happen?
Well, under the legislation that was passed this last session, the whole legislature, and under the compact that was proposed, and I'd like to emphasize it was a draft. We were certainly amenable to discussions about how things might be changed, because that compact certainly has not been executed, so there's plenty of time for amendments or changes. But obviously, to be able to sell the water, we've got to clear the title. And there are two ways to do that. We can either, somebody can file a lawsuit and we can figure out
Whose water is it?
whose water is it.
Yep.
Or we can reach agreement among the claimants, which are essentially the Chickasaw Nation, the Choctaw Nation, and the state, and try to see if we can solve it through negotiations.
Well, let's talk about that proposed compact just a minute, because it does give some insight into what the people that were negotiating the compact thought. And I want to focus Representative Blackburn on the revenue that would come from the sale. It's my understanding under the compact as proposed that the revenue would be divided 50-50 between the 50% to the state of Oklahoma, 50% to the Choctaw and Chickasaw nations, with the Choctaw Nation getting 37.5% and the Chickasaw getting 12.5%. Is that an appropriate distribution of the revenue?
Well, I think one of the things, Kent, that makes that proposal somewhat dangerous is that even though Howard is talking about the fact that we have to say whose water is this,
Sure.
and that there was a claim that in the compact we're not saying that this is, the Indians have any claim to the water, which, as we said in the last show, most legal experts say under tribal sovereignty there are a lot of things that the Indians do have authority over. Water is not one of them, unless it's their land. Is that by including them in the water sale and saying they get 50% of the proceeds, any court would find that in fact they do have legal claim to the water just by virtue of the fact that the state has given them 50% of the proceeds, that even though we're not saying in that proposed compact that they are in fact entitled to the water, just by giving them the proceeds to half of the entire amount of money, they would be legal claimants after that.
Well, let me follow up on that just a minute, and then I'll ask Howard to comment. But I can only assume from what you said that you would then suggest that giving them 50% of the revenue is not justified.
I think that's high, given the percentage of the population that they have, and I also I don't have any opposition to the tribes, but I think they ought to be treated like every other Oklahoman, and I understand the need for tribal sovereignty on other things, but this is not one thing that people agree that they have tribal control over. They do, as I repeat, Kent, they do have control over the water rights on their own property.
Yes.
But when we start as a state to step out and give them something that they don't, everyone agrees they do not have control over, we have gone into a whole new realm here. And
It sets a dangerous precedent.
it sets a very dangerous precedent, and my concern, and I know that Howard's is as well, is that we do what's good for the entire whole. We don't try to bribe the tribes into just getting off our back when we sell water. And I might state that those of us that were involved in this, and I had a lot of good allies, people that usually do not get together, environmentalists and farmers, and independent petroleum people. They usually don't agree on anything. They agreed on this because they recognize that the potential, the precedents, as you say, Mick, that we're setting with this.
Well, Howard, why did the negotiators come up with a 50-50 split as best you understand it?
Well, Kent, you've been in negotiations, and negotiations have their own life. We went into these negotiations with several goals. The legislature in 1999, I think, had passed a joint resolution that actually started all of this process going. And in that, they had set out 6 what they called cornerstone principles. And what we wanted to do was to enshrine those cornerstone principles with the tribes. What that entailed was a couple of things. One, we negotiated and got from the tribes the right of Oklahomans to utilize water from any of those basins in the 22 counties for free, which has been our tradition. That Oklahoma City, when they use the water from Atoka Creek, they don't pay for the water. They pay for the infrastructure, they pay for reservoirs, they pay for
which is all very expensive.
All very expensive, but they don't pay for the raw commodity. That was a very hard part of the negotiations, as you can imagine, because part of this was Oklahoma City, that seems to have lost in this, Oklahoma City was also in the mix here of trying to get some water for their future. And so there was, in effect, a buyer there that everybody knew about that we essentially negotiated for all of Oklahoma in the future to utilize that water for free. We also were concerned about the regulatory issues that we talked about during the last show. And finally, we owe the federal government $38 million for Sardis Lake. And they have given us notifications now that the compact has broken down that they are going to begin collection efforts. And so we wanted
We being the state.
We being the state. We wanted some way to pay for Sardis Lake, and this would have contemplated that action.
Let me jump in here and get us to a break. It's a very interesting aspect. We'll expand on it, and we'll talk more about this idea of selling Oklahoma's water to the state of Texas. You are watching The Verdict.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all of the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. Oklahoma Lawyers for Children has over 350 of the best attorneys and volunteers in Oklahoma County who donate their time and services to represent children. For more information, call 405-23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
St. Gregory's University has been changing the lives of people like me for 125 years. Affordable, private Catholic education, balanced with dedication to community and service, makes St. Gregory special. We're extremely proud of our students' outstanding academic achievements and our nationally ranked athletic teams. It's when you help a student build a future of balance, integrity, and service that you change a life forever. St. Gregory's, a community for life.
We are C.H. Guernsey & Company. We provide engineering, architecture, and consulting services to clients across the nation and around the world. Our corporate headquarters are located in Oklahoma City, and we have branch offices across the country, including Tulsa. We have provided quality service to clients for nearly 75 years. At Guernsey, we believe in quality work and unconditional client satisfaction. To learn more about C.H. Guernsey & Company, log on to our website at chguernsey.com.
Mick Cornett and Kent Myers back on The Verdict, our second consecutive show on the controversial topic of selling water to Texas. Kent, where do we want to jump in here?
I want to go back to the proposed compact that we've talked about to discuss a little philosophical question I have. As I read the document, it seemed as though the net revenue that would come to the state of Oklahoma, without regard to what went to the Indian tribes, was earmarked for use for economic development only in the area of the state from which the water had come. In other words, the compact area, or generally speaking, the 22 counties. You know, if it could not be used for economic development in any other part of the state or for any purpose in any other part of the state. Assuming that assumption is correct, Debbie, what do you think about that? Is that wise?
Well, I think that it could be challenged constitutionally. I do think that the folks in southeastern Oklahoma ought to have their needs met with their own water before it's even considered to be shipped to another part of the state. And they definitely are in need of water. They have been hauling water in McCurtain County now for the past 4 years, the county sheriff has, because of the drought conditions. And the infrastructure needs to be improved. But I think, Kent, that it could be challenged, that is money, that is state money, rather than regional money, and probably would be challenged. I agree with Howard that the needs down there of infrastructure are intense, but when I hear these people in southeastern Oklahoma who ask me to get involved in this talk, they're not opposed to the sale of water. In fact, they'd be happy to sell it even to western Oklahoma, they say, but your question about would the proceeds go directly to southeastern Oklahoma, legally there is dispute over that.
And that's an economically depressed area, so I mean there's reason for them to be concerned about giving up one of their precious commodities.
Yes, there is some of that. They don't have the rural water infrastructure that they need, but the question is, even the amounts of money, and Howard would know more about the amounts that were discussed for the sale of this water. With the amount of money that was being discussed at one point, you could not create the kind of infrastructure in southeastern Oklahoma to correct the problem that we're talking about. It was a low price given what it would have cost to take the same amount of money out of some of the lakes in northern Texas for the same purpose.
Howard, let me throw that same question to you with a little preface, perhaps. Hypothetically speaking, go to Debbie's hometown of Woodward or go out into Woodward County and find an oil and gas well on land owned by the School Land Commission. They sell that oil or gas. That money isn't designated, the revenue isn't designated specifically for use in Woodward County. It's for use by the School Land Commission Trust statewide. Why have we departed from that, what has been our prior practice in Oklahoma on selling state resources and adopted an earmarking approach for a particular area?
Well, I think there are a whole lot of reasons that come up. We had a lot of discussion before we entered into the negotiations, particularly with legislators. I met personally with every legislator from down in that part of the world to understand what they were thinking about this and what they thought was appropriate. I met with legislative leadership to talk about it. We think we got a lot out of the compact for the state of Oklahoma as a whole, besides just the money. The money was really kind of an enabling issue, if you will, to get us what we were trying to get. We got the regulatory issue resolved in a way that we thought was satisfactory, as I mentioned in the last show. That issue I mentioned earlier about Oklahomans having the right to water for free, so if it ever does become economically feasible to pipe water to western Oklahoma, then they won't have to pay for that water. They'll have to pay an enormous amount of money to move it that far, but the water itself is not paid for. So this is a depressed area. The price that we wanted for the water, which Representative Blackburn is correct, basically the sale broke down primarily because we were so far apart in price. We had set a price of $5 billion over the 99 years, which is actually about $350 million in present value. Texas had about a 2.2 or something like that billion dollar value, about $175 million in present value. We've identified $90+ million in infrastructure, just water and wastewater infrastructure needs in southeastern Oklahoma. And there's a lot more that they need down there. We'd structured it in such a way we thought we could have bonding capacity of over $150 million right up front. So we could have begun to address some of those things, but it's now going to be studied, and that's appropriate.
Let me jump in here and kind of get to some final comments of each of our two guests. And I think I also want to take a bottom line approach here. Representative Blackburn, if we can have a study that proves there is a surplus of water, and if we can determine who owns the water and who should share in the proceeds, is it still a good idea? In your mind, should we move forward?
The group that was working with me, the groups that I mentioned, are not opposed to the sale of water. They want to be sure that we know how much water we have in Oklahoma, how much we use, and to be scientific about it before we go selling it out of state. They're saying in 10 years, they will have the technology, hopefully, to pump water uphill in elevation from the eastern half of the state to the western. Why would we mortgage our future? Why would we give this water away at a low price? It is possible to sell so much water, Mick, that it is not sustainable.
And 99 years is a long time.
It's a long time, and every magazine that you pick up anymore, every newspaper just about on a weekly basis at least has an article about water and the need for water. Why would we give a resource away in a state that once went through the dirty 30s? In fact, we've had the driest 4 years on record. If it weren't for good soil conservation, this state would be blowing away like it did in the 30s because we've had the driest 4 years ever. And they've been dry in southeastern Oklahoma. The only thing I'm concerned about is the entire state. I grew up in northwestern Oklahoma, high and dry. I represent Oklahoma City. I want Oklahoma City to have the water they need. This is not about that. The people that contacted me and asked me to get involved in this are friends from southeastern Oklahoma, because a lot of those representatives from southeastern Oklahoma, frankly, were in an extremely difficult position. There are a lot of tribal membership down there, and they were between different groups of people, the tribes, but I've had even letters from tribal members who say, protect the water. Be sure that our tribal leadership is not just doing something that's good for the tribal leadership, but for the good of the whole. And that's what we need. I didn't get that done in this last session. I got a moratorium on the sale of the water. I did not get a scientific water study. And that's the thing that has to be done next, because legislators, as Howard knows, will make a political decision.
Right.
We don't know.
Let me jump in here and give Howard the last word. If we can get rid of those two hurdles that I talked about, know where it's going, know we have enough water, is it a good idea? Should we proceed? We got about 30 seconds.
Absolutely. We have no problem selling other resources. In southeastern Oklahoma, timber's big business. We sell oil and gas all over the world. If we have an excess resource, particularly when we have such a depressed, poor part of the country, we ought to aggressively figure out how to use that so that we can improve Oklahoma, all of Oklahoma's lives, and particularly this area of the state.
I've learned a lot. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Kent and I'll be back with a final word when we get back.
American Express Tax and Business Services. We're accountants. We do taxes, business valuations, estate planning, and consulting. And we're right here in Oklahoma, working with the owners of small and medium-sized businesses. Steve Wilsey and Stuart Meyer have the resources and the experience. American Express Tax and Business Services. In Oklahoma City, the phone number is 405-843-5311.
We're wrapping up another edition of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. And Kent, some final thoughts.
What about this concept of selling a state resource that has in our history been very precious and very scarce because we have apparently an abundance of it now in one part of the state? A very difficult question. Another difficult question is it wise policy, much less constitutional, wise policy to say the revenue received from the sale of that state resource is going to be used only in the area from which the resource came. Those that live in that area think that's a good idea. Those that live outside that area may question it, and that may be something that's ultimately litigated. Interesting to see what the legislature is going to do in this upcoming session. They can lift the 3-year moratorium and get right after the sale. They may commission a water study, and it may take a little longer. But this is not an issue that's over. It's not an issue that we won't hear of again. It will be on the table next time the legislature convenes. Final thought for me, thanks so much to the Legal Graphics people. Sam Anderson and Janice Fowler for giving us our great graphics on this show. We appreciate it. Legal Graphics in Oklahoma City is the best outfit around, and we appreciate you.
Let's wrap up by reminding people that they can come to our website and tell us what they think about today's show or any future show or an idea for a future show. It's theverdict.tv, not .com, but .tv. Tell us what you think. We'd love to hear from you. For Kent Myers, I'm Mick Cornett. We'll see you next time on The Verdict.